Mudenda pushes for diaspora vote. Zim fails to explain human rights abuses. It heads to roll in parastatals, and farmers must comply with VDS livestock movement. And now for the stories in greater detail. The family of a political activist missing since 24 May have made an impassioned plea for her safe return. Mo Blessing Ali, aged 46, was allegedly attacked by a mob of alleged ZANU-PF supporters on Tuesday night in the Nyashima area of Chitungwiza and then bundled into a car. Her family has not heard from her since. According to the Triple C, Mo Blessing was beaten and forced by some Chisanko brothers into their vehicle and has not been seen since. Zimbabwe security services have been accused of a series of abductions of opposition supporters, which the main opposition, the Citizens Coalition for Change, fears will get worse ahead of elections next year. Speaker of the National Assembly, Jacob Mudenda, said the constitution should be amended to allow people in the diaspora to vote, becoming the first senior official in the ruling ZANU-PF party to push that agenda. Mudenda said amendments to the Electoral Act should clearly specify the procedures and mechanisms for registration and voting for citizens in the diaspora. Mudenda also said political parties and candidates who perpetrated electoral violence should be disqualified through amendments to the Electoral Act, which should empower the Zimbabwe Election Commission, ZEC, to censor errant political parties and politicians. He also pointed out that the future of the country's elections depended on the role political parties played in promoting peaceful and credible elections by sending the right signals and urging their supporters to shun electoral violence. Mudenda also added that ZEC should be empowered through the Electoral Act to censor or even disqualify political parties or candidates that act with impunity during the electoral processes. The United Nations report of the Working Group on the Universal Periodic Review of Zimbabwe says the country has failed to explain alleged human rights abuses and enforced disappearances. The United Nations reviewed Zimbabwe's human rights situation earlier this year through a troika comprising Armenia, Luxembourg, and Namibia that was set up to facilitate Zimbabwe's review process. Some of the issues raised included oppressive pieces of legislation, such as the Private Voluntary Organizations Amendment Bill, which is currently being crafted in Parliament. NGOs view it as oppressive because it seeks to ban their operations and to keep them mum on human rights abuses, lack of transparency and accountability in the use of public resources. But government has argued that the amendments to the PVO bill seek to ensure greater transparency and consistency in the registration and regulation of private voluntary organizations and were the product of extensive research and multi-stakeholder consultations. On disappearances of persons, Zimbabwe is said to have failed to give a reasonable response, with the police continuously saying they were providing fortnightly reports on investigations of, for example, the disappearance of activist cum journalist Itai Zamara in 2015. President Emmerson Mnangagwa has admitted that the ruling ZANU-PF party is being ripped apart by deep-rooted divisions ahead of the 2023 general elections. Addressing supporters while commissioning 3 boreholes in Glenview, Harare on Saturday, Mnangagwa blasted some individuals who he alleged were using money to get positions in the party. The presidential borehole drilling scheme is supported by Prevail International Chief Executive Tempa Tungwarara. It will also be implemented in Chitungwiza as ZANU-PF tries to woo urban votes ahead of general elections next year. Mnangagwa said ZANU-PF Harare provincial chairperson Goodwills Masimirimbwa was struggling to contain factionalism in the province. President Emmerson Mnangagwa will soon take decisive action against leaders of state-owned enterprises responsible for gross malfeasance, lack of agency, and costly bureaucracy, and amid education heads role. Writing in his weekly column for the Sun Mail, the president expressed disquiet at the sheer lack of creative management that is affecting their potential to meaningfully contribute to economic growth and development. Government has held constitutional court ruling which raised the age of sexual consent from 16 to 18. Information and Publicity Minister Monica Mtangwa noted that following the ruling by the court, it was now incumbent upon Justice Minister Ziambi Ziambi in Parliament to enact within 12 months a law that protects children from sexual exploitation in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. And in other news, a foreman at Zimbabwe Electricity Transmission and Distribution Company ZETDC's Harare Marine Depot has been jailed 2 years for stealing a 500 kilovolt transformer at his workplace. Pearson Kajiti, who was the acting foreman when he committed the offense, was convicted by a Harare magistrate after a full trial. He will, however, serve 18 months after 6 months of his sentence was set aside on conditions of good behavior. The magistrate took into account that he was a first offender and a family man. Candidates eyeing top ZANU-PF Women's League posts are allegedly scared to challenge Information Minister Monica Mtangwa due to alleged close links to President Emerson Mnangagwa. The ruling party's Women's League will hold its elective conference from June 23 to 26. Women in the party angling for top posts in Manicaland province are said to have chickened out on the 11th hour, resulting in Mchanga being uncontested for the top post. Each province is required to submit 4 candidates ahead of the National Women's League Conference slated for next month. President Emerson Mnangagwa has said the shortage of electricity in the country was a sign of growing mining and industrialization in the economy. The Zimbabwe Electricity Supply Authority, ZESA, says the country's generation capacity decreased due to aging equipment on the power generators, Wange Thermal Power Station and Kariba Hydropower Station. The power utility also said importation was restricted since the country owes huge monies to regional power utilities, including Eskom of South Africa and Hydro Kahoro Basa of Mozambique. Writing in his weekly column, President Mnangagwa said he was satisfied that the nation was ready for a massive expansion in thermal power production. Zimbabwe Defense Forces training has been commended after Major Winnet Jarare was honored by the United Nations for her efforts to integrate gender perspectives into peacekeeping activities. Major Jarare, the recipient of the 2021 UN Military Gender Advocate of the Year award, returned home yesterday after her efforts won the commendation of United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. On arrival at the Robert Gabriel Mugabe International Airport, the military officer commended government for facilitating his service in the UN mission. And moving on to other news, the Department of Veterinary Services (DVS) recently slaughtered and burnt 28 head of cattle that were illegally moved from a Theilerosis quarantine in Nseza. The destruction of the cattle was meant to curb the spread of Theilerosis disease, popularly known as January disease. The cattle had no veterinary movement permit. The farmer had contravened the provisions of Animal Health Movement and of Cattle and Pigs Regulations 1984. This is not the first incident whereby the DVS has shot and burnt cattle for illegal movement. Either the cattle would have been illegally moved from a quarantine or a foot and mouth disease red zone, among other reasons. Illegal animal movements are the single most important driver of transmission of animal diseases from one area to the next, with the most dreaded being FMD and January disease. And now for the sport news. Struggling Harare Giants, Caps United's woes continue after they succumbed to yet another defeat when they went down by 2 goals to Bulawayo Chiefs at Luveva Stadium on Sunday. This was the 5th loss on the trot for Lloyd Chitembo's men. And Mamelodi Sundowns striker Peter Shalulile has been crowned as the South African Premier Soccer League Footballer of the Year for the 2021-22 season. Shalulile beat the competition of teammates Andile Jali, who dominated other categories, and Temba Zwane and Royal AM's Victor Letsoale. And this brings us to the end of our news bulletin. Now for the headlines once again. Mudenda pushes for diaspora vote. Zim fails to explain human rights abuses. Heads to roll in parastatals, and farmers must comply with the veterinary services livestock movement. Thank you so much for joining us for our news bulletin. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of day.